In this video, we're talking about present perfect verb tense. Present perfect, I think, is a really interesting verb tense. I know a lot of students think it's very difficult, but it makes a lot of sense if you think about it this way. So here's a picture of a bridge. I want you to think about the present perfect tense as a bridge. The present perfect connects actions in the past to something that's happening in the present. Now there are a few different ways that we do that with the present perfect, but if you keep that image in mind, a bridge connecting the past to the present, I think that's going to help you to understand the present perfect tense a little bit better. Before we talk about that though, let's review the form of present perfect. So the present perfect follows a very similar formula that we've seen before: subject, helping verb, main verb, and object. Okay, that same formula that we have seen before. Let's just look at a couple of examples. I have. Okay, so here our helping verb is either going to be have or has. It's going to be have if the subject is I, you, we, or they, and it's going to be has if the subject is he, she, or it. For our main verb, the main verb is going to be what we call the past participle form of the verb, or sometimes grammar books will call this the third form of the verb. Now, depending on which verb it is, if it's a regular or an irregular verb, regular verbs, the past participle is the same as the past tense form. You just add ed. But for irregular verbs have a different special third form. Okay, so let's do an example here. Okay, if I say something like, I have cooked dinner. Okay, I have cooked dinner. So here for my main verb, you can see I'm going to use ed. Let's do another example. She, this time, my helping verb is going to be she. She has, okay, she has. And then for my main verb, I might say something like, she has eaten dinner. She has eaten dinner, okay? And here you can see that eaten is an irregular verb, so it has a special past participle form. If you need a list of regular and irregular verbs and the forms of irregular verbs, it's very easy to find on Google. Just Google English irregular verbs, and you'll get a nice long list of the past tense and the past participle forms of irregular verbs. Okay, let's look at negative. So negative, again, our formula is pretty much the same. Subject, helping verb, main verb. Don't forget not in there. And then our object. So subject plus helping verb plus not, main verb, and then object. And let's take a look at an example here. So she, and then I would say she has not. And you could say she has not studied Spanish. Okay. She has not studied Spanish. Subject, helping verb not, main verb, and then my object there. I can also do contractions. So I could say she hasn't. Or if I'm using have, the contraction for have not would be haven't. And those are fine to use as well. For yes or no questions, our formula again is very much the same. Subject, helping verb, subject, then the main verb form, and then the object. So I might get something like this. Has she studied English? And then my answers for yes or no questions are obviously going to be either yes or no. And the short forms here would be yes, she has. I'll use the auxiliary verb, the helping verb here. Or no, she hasn't. And I'll use the helping verb with the contraction for yes or no questions. And for WH questions, again, my formula is really the same. I start with the WH word, then the subject. Oops. Not the subject, the helping verb, then the subject, the main verb, and the object. So that, again, that formula is very similar to what we have seen before, and I might say something like, when, let's do where. Where has she studied English? Okay. And then the answer to that would be some kind of information. She has studied English in her home country. Okay, now here's where present perfect gets a little bit complicated. Talk about the functions. So the first function of present perfect is an unfinished action. I'm going to draw a timeline here. So this is, let's pretend that this is time, and here's the past, this is now, and the future. It's a little hard to read now. With present perfect, a lot of times we talk about an action that begins in the past, continues up until now, and then keeps going in the future. It's what we call an unfinished action. Now remember what we talked about with the bridge. In this case, the bridge is very easy to see. The action began in the past and continues into the present. So we're connecting the past into the present here. To give you an example of that, I might have a sentence like this. I have taught English since 2012. Okay, so here you can see that my action began in the past. Since you're taking a class from me, you know that it still continues today. So that's a bridge from a past, an action that began in the past that still continues today. An unfinished past action is the first way that we use present perfect. The next way that we use present perfect is to talk about an indefinite action in the past. So what I mean by indefinite, I'm going to draw my timeline again here. Future, now, and the past, now, and the future. Indefinite means, you might recognize that word define, not defined. In other words, don't know exactly when it happened. We don't know a specific time in the past when this action happened, but all that we know is that at some point in the past, this action happened. Now, remember what we talked about with the bridge, right? What happens here is that there's some past action. We don't know when it happens, or it doesn't matter, but it's somehow connected to something that's going on in the present, something that's happening in the present. Give you an example. Let's say that we're talking about going on a trip to China. Okay, talking about going on a trip to China. That's the topic of conversation in the present, and I say something like, I have traveled to China. Okay, not saying when, it doesn't matter when. The point is just that this action happened in the past, and it has a connection to what's happening in the present. I have traveled to China. We're talking about China right now. Or to give you another example, okay, let's say that I come home from work, okay, and I'm hungry. So I say to my husband, I say, have you eaten dinner yet? Okay, have you eaten dinner yet? And then he either says, yes, I have, or he says, no, I haven't. right? But the reason that I'm using present perfect here is because I'm asking about an action that might have happened in the past, and it's connected to my hunger in the present. So an indefinite past action, doesn't matter when it happened, what time it happened. All that matters is that it's connected to what's going on now in the present. Now, this is different than simple past, which we'll learn about in another video, but simple past always needs a definite time. You need to state exactly when it happened by using words like yesterday or last week. Instead, what we do with present perfect is we use words like yet, never, ever, already. All these words are kind of vague, not definite, kind of general. They don't tell us a specific time. So if you see these words, that's a pretty good clue that you're using present perfect tense. Okay. Next function that I want to talk about with present perfect is to talk about a repeated action in the past that's unfinished. Okay, so let's say that you have an action that happened once, twice, 3 times, and then it's going to happen at least once more in the future. That's what we call an unfinished repeated action. So I might say something like, we have taken 3 quizzes. Now the idea here is that we will take one more. Okay? Compare this to how I might use simple past tense. With simple past tense, I might say something like, we took 3 quizzes. When I use simple past to talk about a repeated action, this means we will not take any more. We're done. It's over with. Okay? So that's a big difference between when we use present perfect to talk about an unfinished repeated action and simple past to talk about a repeated action that is finished. And then last, I want to talk about a recent past action. So again, keeping in mind the idea of a bridge, let's say that I have an action that just happened in the past. Now there, the connection to now is pretty clear because the recent past is very close to the present. So that's what the connection is. That's where that bridge comes in to play there. So I might say, see words like just. Okay, that's a big one that you might see when you're using present perfect tense. Okay, so I might say something like, I have just finished my homework. And now I can go to the party. Okay? So a recent past action, an action that happened very close to now but in the past, would be another reason why you would use present perfect. Okay? So that's the end of our video about present perfect tense.